It begins not with war, but with the rhythm of footsteps on sacred soil, footsteps of prophets, of children, of traders and poets whose breath once mingled with the jasmine-scented wind. Palestine is not merely a land, it is a living scroll, etched with revelation and resistance, soaked in prayer and perseverance. Beneath its ancient olive trees lies the heartbeat of civilizations and the pain of betrayals that stretch across centuries. From the call to prayer echoing from the dome of the rock to the silent screams beneath shattered rooftops, this story is not just about conflict. It is about unwavering hope, stolen homes, and a people who, even with chains around their wrists, raise their palms to the sky. This is not a tale for the faint-hearted, for within it dwell both divine whispers and human cries. This is the story of Palestine, long before the borders were drawn in ink and blood, before soldiers patrolled alleyways where once children played. The land of Palestine thrived with an elegance born from the breath of prophets and the whispers of angels. It was not a barren land awaiting conquest. It was already a living, breathing miracle. From its olive groves to the hills where sheep grazed under shepherds' chants, everything pulsed with a sacred rhythm. The city of Jerusalem, Al-Quds, was its crown, shimmering beneath the same sun that warmed the prophet Ibrahim's path and later received the footsteps of the final messenger during the miraculous night journey. It was here that prayers from three great faiths converged in sanctity. In the mornings, Jewish scribes would study their scriptures. At noon, the tolling bells of churches summoned the devoted. And by dusk, the minarets would echo with the call to prayer. This harmony was not fabricated, it was carved by time and faith until the arrogance of empires and politics began to smother what had once been pure. It was the British, cloaked in diplomacy but holding daggers behind their backs, who began the unraveling. They entered Palestine under the pretense of protection, waving promises of peace to both Arabs and Jews, sowing confusion like a serpent whispering in two ears at once. The Balfour Declaration was not merely a letter. It was a wound inked upon the soul of a nation. Imagine a people watching strangers arrive at their doorstep with deeds to a home that had been theirs for generations. How do you explain to a child that his grandmother's orchard, where she used to sing lullabies among the citrus trees, is no longer his? That her grave, nestled beneath the shade of an old fig tree, would soon be surrounded by barbed wire? The Palestinians were not silent. They protested, not just with fists, but with poetry, with song, with unwavering resolve. They watched their villages fall one by one, not to natural disaster or fate, but to calculated plans and systematic expulsions. Men who had once welcomed neighbors with bread were now refugees in their own land, clutching keys to homes already demolished. Women wept quietly, tucking photographs of lost sons between pages of the Quran, whispering verses through lips dry with grief. And yet they did not forget. They did not forget the scent of their homes, the names of their streets, the way the light hit the rooftops at sunrise. Palestine lived within them, no matter how far they were cast. With the establishment of Israel in 1948, a cataclysm known as the Nakba, the catastrophe, unfolded. Over 700,000 Palestinians were expelled or fled in terror as massacres like Deir Yassin stained the earth with innocent blood. Villages were erased, not only physically, but in maps, in records, in textbooks. But not from memory. The elders remembered. The children inherited the memory like a precious heirloom. Life in refugee camps became a limbo. Tents gave way to tin shacks, shacks to concrete blocks. But the yearning for return never faded. Every Friday, imams would remind their flocks of their origin. Every wedding carried songs of longing. Every lullaby became a prayer for return. And even as decades passed and generations were born in exile, the keys, those same rusted metal tokens, remained tucked under pillows, beside Qurans, waiting. As the world watched, sometimes in sympathy, sometimes in apathy, the occupation deepened. Walls rose where friendships had once stood. Checkpoints dissected cities like surgical cuts in living flesh. Soldiers with rifles decided who could go to school, who could reach a hospital, who could bury their dead. In the West Bank, settlements grew like tumors, guarded by fences and guns, casting shadows over Palestinian homes. Gaza, once a vibrant coastal gem, was transformed into an open-air prison. Its skies darkened with drones, its nights lit by explosions. Children there learned to identify the sound of an F-16 before they learned to read. They drew tanks instead of trees. Yet they smiled. Somehow, they smiled. They did not romanticize their suffering. They exposed it. They adorned it with meaning. They turned it into something that could be carried across borders, into hearts, into the conscience of a world too willing to look away. Meanwhile, in the cities and villages of the West Bank, the settlers crept further in. With every sunrise, new trailers were planted on stolen land. What began as illegal outposts became fortified enclaves, protected by soldiers and justified by twisted laws. A settler could walk freely with a gun. A Palestinian could be shot for walking with a backpack. Entire communities were demolished under the guise of permits Palestinians could never obtain. Wells were seized, roads segregated, and justice denied. And yet, in defiance of this apartheid reality, the people of Palestine organized. They stood in front of bulldozers. They chained themselves to olive trees. They marched on in the thousands with flags and chants, knowing full well that live ammunition might meet them. They mourned, and then they rose again. The diaspora watched from afar, a scattered nation longing for a land many had never seen. From refugee camps in Lebanon to neighborhoods in Chile, from the streets of London to the universities of Kuala Lumpur, Palestinians in exile became the voice of the homeland. They wrote books, filmed documentaries, led marches. They kept the memory of their villages alive, even if those villages were now beneath shopping malls or forests planted by strangers. They remembered not just geography, but recipes, stories, dialects. A grandmother in Amman would correct her grandson, not Zatar, but our Zatar, from the hills of Jenin. And so the identity endured, not in dusty museums, but in kitchens, in protests, in lullabies sung across oceans. Even as the world changed, Palestine remained the moral compass for many, a measure of one's commitment to justice. From South African anti-apartheid leaders to Native American land defenders, the Palestinian struggle echoed in movements worldwide. And in return, solidarity arrived like a tide. Artists painted murals in their honor. Athletes raised the keffiyeh on podiums. Scholars exposed the truths behind the walls. Children in faraway lands asked their parents, "Why can't the boy in the video go to school?" The question, simple and searing, reached the hearts that statistics could not. Palestine became not just a place, but a cause, a test of conscience. But conscience, however awakened, was not enough. The systems that sustained the occupation were vast: economic, military, political. Billions in funding, alliances forged in back rooms, a global architecture of complicity. Yet in every crack of that architecture, the voice of Palestine spoke, louder, sharper, more resolute. In courtrooms where land deeds were debated, in universities where apartheid was dissected, in churches where sermons spoke of justice, the name of Palestine was not erased. And even when attempts were made to silence it, to criminalize its flag, to censor its stories, the people spoke louder. They marched in the millions. They flooded social media. They turned funerals into rallies. They refused to be statistics. Hope, then, was not a distant luxury. It was a strategy. It was in the eyes of a mother who packed her child's school bag with hope and a sandwich. It was in the young man who rebuilt his demolished home, brick by brick. It was in the girl who danced dabke at her cousin's wedding, her feet stamping both rhythm and resistance into the ground. And it was in the prisoner who, after decades in solitary confinement, emerged with his spirit unbroken and his words sharp as ever. They taught the world a different kind of strength, not one that conquers, but one that endures. And still the question loomed: what comes next? For every injustice, there seemed to be more waiting. For every ceasefire, another siren. But Palestine had learned not to ask when freedom would come, but how to live in a way that honored its inevitability. The people sowed seeds they might never see bloom. They trained their children not only in defiance, but in compassion. They taught them the names of the prophets and the names of the villages erased from maps. They whispered to them that dignity was not negotiable and that the land would remember them, even if the world forgot. So the story continued, not in pages, but in prayers, in protests, in the silent resolve of those who refused to surrender their history. And as the sun set once more over the hills of Palestine, casting golden light on stones older than empires, one truth remained as clear as ever. The spirit of a people cannot be exiled, not by walls, not by bullets, not by centuries. Jerusalem, the heart of Palestine, suffered a different kind of siege. The city was hollowed out, its neighborhoods gentrified, its residents pushed out. The call to prayer was muffled under bureaucracy. Ancient homes were claimed through legal tricks. Families evicted with documents they could not read, signed by foreign hands. But the spirit of the city resisted. During Ramadan, despite barricades, Muslims flocked to Al-Aqsa. Despite beatings and arrests, they prayed. Grandmothers with broken backs stood shoulder to shoulder with teenagers flinging stones. It wasn't just faith that brought them. It was belonging. It was defiance. It was love. And then came the intifadas, the uprisings, not of armies, but of people with nothing to lose but dignity. Stones clashed against tanks, slingshots faced bullets. Boys became martyrs, girls became legends. Mothers buried their children with trembling hands and steely spines. The world filmed, documented, debated. But Palestine did not wait for permission to cry or to fight. It kept breathing, kept birthing resistance in poetry, in painting, in flame. And through all this, the dream of return never died. It clung to the wind, etched in graffiti on shattered walls, stitched into cafes, sung in wedding chants. A dream passed from father to son, from mother to daughter. A dream that no wall could cage, no bullet could silence, no treaty could erase. Because Palestine, you see, is not merely geography. It is a living soul, wounded but unbroken. And this soul, this ancient, sacred, burning soul, continues to march forward, carrying with it the names of the fallen, the hopes of the living, and the undying promise of return. The seasons continue to change in Palestine, but the patterns of oppression remained hauntingly familiar. The rain still fell upon the domes of Jerusalem, the sandstorm still swept across Gaza, and yet beneath this rhythm of nature was a people forced to live unnaturally, surveilled, caged, and dispossessed. From the winding alleys of Hebron to the blockaded coasts of Khan Yunis, the air carried stories too heavy for the wind to bear. Stories of fathers denied permits to visit dying children, of farmers beaten while trying to harvest their olives, of students stopped at checkpoints and told that their future did not matter. The occupiers' grip tightened not only around the land, but around time itself, making people late for prayers, for school, for weddings and funerals. It was as though a whole nation had been sentenced to a lifetime of interruption, and yet Palestine refused to stand still. The people, like the olive trees they cherished, stood firm. Their resistance was not always with stones or slogans. It was also with stubborn acts of normalcy. A woman hanging laundry on a balcony overlooking a military outpost, a grandfather planting jasmine near a watchtower, a boy flying a kite over a wall taller than his dreams. The daily life of a Palestinian became its own kind of defiance. And in this quiet defiance bloomed an entire generation born into resistance. These children did not choose the struggle, but the struggle chose them. They learned to navigate armored jeeps on their way to school. They memorized not only the Quran, but also the names of every martyr in their village. They grew up faster than they should have, their innocence traded for survival. International eyes would glance toward Palestine only when the sky turned red, when bombs fell like rain and body bags lined the streets. In those moments, the world would gasp, protest, hashtag. But when the dust settled, the silence returned. Aid was sent, statements were made, but the structures of the occupation, the checkpoints, the walls, the detentions, remained untouched. The occupier polished its weapons and practiced its lies, calling the imprisoned the threat and the dispossessed the aggressors. It built towers of propaganda that painted bullets as security and ethnic cleansing as self-defense. But even through the smoke of disinformation, the truth endured, spoken through trembling lips, carved in graffiti on bullet-riddled walls, whispered in midnight prayers from mothers who had buried too many sons. Gaza became the bleeding edge of this truth. Sealed off from the world, its people breathed under siege for years that felt like centuries. The sea was there, blue, vast, and mocking, a promise of freedom just beyond reach. Fishermen risked their lives every morning, not only to catch fish, but to assert their right to live. The hospitals of Gaza operated on fumes, with doctors stitching wounds in candlelight, with children dying not from injury, but from the delay of a permit. Electricity came and went like a fickle ghost. Yet in the darkest nights, Gaza sang. Musicians played oud melodies amidst rubble. Painters used broken tiles to make murals of martyrs. Poets scribbled verses by battery light.